The following program is brought to you by the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research. To learn more, visit www.mcsilver.org, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter.
So like Mary said, I just recently graduated from the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Policy and Practice, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of my dissertation findings. And the title is Unspoken Mother Perspectives About Mothering from a Sex Worker Community in Kolkata, India. All right, so I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of my findings and not all of them. And, but I just wanted to contextualize my talk in the bigger study so it would make more sense over the course of this discussion. Sorry. So my first study aims were to explore sex worker mothers' relationships with their children and their beliefs about regarding communicating about sensitive topics such as sex work and sexual health. Everything is so wordy in our world, right? And also to develop, implement, and test the feasibility and preliminary efficacy of a community collaborative, family-based sexual health communication intervention with sex workers in India. I collaborated with a sex workers collective in Kolkata, India. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my settings. But this is my bigger conceptual model. And what we were really interested in doing was intervening on the mother level about changing their beliefs about sexual health communication with their children. And all this might not make sense, but towards the end it might make a little bit more sense. So what in this study, or what I'm talking to you about today, is more of the contextual factors that led up to the intervention development. And so we're more interested in exploring how mothers negotiated and managed motherhood in the context of sex work in the red light district. So we're really going to unpack that box today. And to give you a little bit of background about sex work in India in particular, there's over 1 million sex workers in India. And again, this is an estimate. There's a lot of kind of controversy about that number. It's hard to count what is sex work, so it's just kind of approximation that's given by the National AIDS Control Organization of India. A lot of mothers, research also says about 50 to 80% of mothers, sex workers are mothers, and they often live in impoverished conditions, face a lot of stigma and discrimination on multiple levels of society. And they often have little access to healthcare and support services. However, one sector that has really looked at them is the HIV world, and we all know that well when we think about when have we heard of sex workers, and it's been in this kind of broader context of HIV risk, and something what I call the risk discourse. And one of my main arguments is this risk discourse really needs to be questioned and how we conceptualize populations that we work with, such as sex workers, perhaps injection drug users who are also mothers as well. And so, because they have been conceptualized as vectors of the disease and risky bodies, a lot of the interventions catered towards them are behavioral modification interventions that aim to increase their condom use. And so I'm going to problematize that a little bit too in the talk. As such, there's really little understanding of their roles as mothers, and it's quite surprising because that is one of the main reasons they come into the work, is to support their children. So the bigger research question, what are the ways in which mothers who are sex workers manage and negotiate motherhood in the context of the red light district? Right, just to give you a brief idea about the setting, this is a community-based participatory research design, and I worked with a collective called Durbar, which is a collective of 65,000 sex workers all across West Bengal, India, and now they've actually spread across all of India. And Kolkata actually houses one of the biggest red light districts in Asia, so just keep that in the back of your head as well. Durbar operates the Shonagachi HIV Intervention Project, which some of you might have heard of. It was started in the early 1990s to address the increasing HIV prevalence amongst sex workers in Kolkata specifically. However, it's kind of transformed into the structural intervention. It's a model World Health Organization program. And so there have been replications of it throughout India and other parts of the world. But it now operates a baking cooperative, a health clinic, a school, multiple schools for children actually. And also they've started a Children of Sex Workers Collective. So these are just some of the things they've done. And this picture of just kind of to give you an idea of the context is just the street that leads up to Shonagachi Red Light District. So I conducted 35 in-depth, semi-structured interviews with sex workers who are mothers who had children ages 10 to 21. And the wide age range was to just capture the difference in experiences mothers had with their different age children. A lot of mothers had more than one child. I sampled through snowball sampling, and I stopped sampling once I reached theoretical saturation, which was about 30 to 35, but I went ahead and did 35 anyway. And I conducted the interviews in Bengali or Hindi. I had a translator with me as well, and then the audio was transcribed and translated into English, and then coded. And I'm not going to get much into the analysis portion, unfortunately I don't have much time, but I use elements of the grounded theory approach to collect the data, but also to analyze it, and I established rigor through keeping a research journal, but also through data triangulation, through focus groups I conducted and individual interviews, member checking with different key stakeholders in the community, and specifically from Durbar, but also through peer debriefing, which I don't know what I would have done if peer debriefing was not an option, but did that for the course of the 2 years, and even now I still engage in it about my data. Oh, I forgot to change that slide. I'm sorry about that. So let's see what these methods really yielded. We found the ways in which mothers negotiated and managed discussions about sensitive information. And sensitive information in this context was discussions around sex work and discussions around sexual health, so HIV, condom use, things of that nature, and also puberty. Was a salient theme, so they were really struggling to figure out how to talk about such things, some of the mothers at least. And some mothers considered it very important for their children to know about their work, so that their relationships with their children would not get impacted in the future. So for instance, a mother of a 15-year-old child said, my older child always knew about this work in some way. He saw my clients. I never hide anything from my son. The didis, the other sex workers around here, hide their children. They put their children far away or lie, and they hide their profession. But this will cause a lot of pain for the child in the future, because when the child grows and when the child finds out about their mom is a sex worker, then that child will have mental problems. So this really speaks to the worry, like I'm going to talk to my child about it now because I don't really want to suffer from the consequences. But on the other hand, there's some mothers who decided to refrain from this disclosure. They felt a lot of anxiety about how the child would respond to such news, even though their child, might have been living in the red light district. And so this one mother, and I hate to call them mother, but that's, unfortunately that's what I'm but she says, I'm afraid to tell my children about the work that I do. It's not suitable for them. I've seen many mothers whose children have yelled and screamed at them because of this work. I just saw an incident like that happen last week. Why would I put myself through that? I don't want to put myself in that situation like that. Why would I hurt my children in that way? So these words weren't so uncommon amongst some of the participants whose children lived elsewhere. Another salient theme that came about was this concept of space. And oftentimes the information mothers shared, like I just discussed, depended on where their children resided. So while the red light area was difficult to navigate at times, mothers were able to use the space as triggers to start conversations about their work. So in many instances, mothers' homes doubled up as places to entertain their clients. So a mother of a teenage daughter who chose to disclose about sex work said, I made her understand that in this place, and she's referring to her room, I raised you, I feed you, I educated you. This is how I make her understand about sex work. My daughter asked, why don't you let me come down to the room I make her understand, look, you're older now. Some customers might grab your hand, and you will go, and he will ask, are you a sex worker? So she knows that she knows the work that I do, but I don't want her to be in sex work now. Moving forward, many mothers also, well, not many, but some mothers also conceptualize the brothels as a spoiled place, so a place not suitable for raising their children. And thus they weren't really comfortable with their children living there. In some of the narratives, we saw this conceptualization as good place and bad place. And the good place were boarding schools or villages with extended families. And so this participant made the choice for her children to reside in the village space. And she says, my daughter lives in the village. There is nothing bad there. There are no issues like sex or HIV over there. She looks after the farmland, cooks and eats, that's all. The village is not a bad place like here, so this type of stuff does not happen there. So that's why I have not talked to her about sex work. Resources was also a salient theme in our interviews. And living in the red light district, the participants were connected to Durbar's collective nature. So there was clinics they had access to, other spaces that really served as kind of protective spaces for their children and also for themselves. And one such thing was peer education. A lot of my participants in the study were trained extensively as peer HIV educators. And so this kind of knowledge seeped into their discussions they had with their children. So one mother specifically says, I felt very good when he asked about HIV. I don't know how to read or write, but my children do. Because they know how to read and write, they want to know more information. Even though I don't know how to read or write, I still know about HIV because of Durbar. It was so good to discuss with him. Lastly, the residing in the red light district also helped mothers have like a supportive environment. And so one of the challenges mothers faced was childcare. And so residing in the red light district offered them opportunity for people in their neighborhood to look after their children. And so one mother says, she actually recalled, she put it into context, recalling her life from before. And she says, before I had to suffer a lot. I had lots of pain before I came to Durbar Collective. I suffered a lot in some instances, but see, if I tell people here in this red light district to take care of my daughter, they will. I like the mummies here. They have daughters the same age as my daughter. That helps too. We help each other. Otherwise, life would be so difficult. And to kind of, sum up these results, because it's, it is a lot, we really have to appreciate the complexity of people's lives when doing this work with them. And so we're able to understand through the lens of information, space, and also the resources that many of the mothers capitalized on. We learned about their lives much more than just looking at it through the risk discourse. So while these, this study isn't generalizable because it speaks to a specific community in Kolkata, and it's not it is a convenient sample. There's still utility in these findings, and the second part of my dissertation was to develop family-based sexual health intervention. So we use these findings to directly develop the intervention. And unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about that right now, but we can talk later if you're interested in hearing more about it. So the broader implications, practice rights, what I call disrupting the risk discourse. We really have to tone it back, and this is basic social work to strengths-based work. And I think that's essential as practitioners and as researchers to be aware of, because we get involved in assessing people's risk. And we really have, like in this study, what we did was to really understand their strengths and resiliency while raising their children in the context of risk. Research-wise, again, just piggybacking off of what I said, we have to develop interventions that really, like this study did, obtain an in-depth understanding of the complexity surrounding people's lives. So they're not only their individual, but interpersonal and structures that they come in contact with. And moreover, policy-wise, many countries around the world criminalize sex work, and there's a lot of research that shows that criminalization of sex work ultimately leads to harming sex workers and their families. And so we really have to mobilize with the groups that we work with to get laws passed around decriminalizing sex work. I'd just like to acknowledge quickly my Dorbar family, the participants, a series of funding that I've gotten, otherwise this research wouldn't have been able to be done, and also Mary McKay, who's been with me on this journey for a really long time, and also McSilver Institute for giving me the opportunity to share these findings. And I think that's good.
I received my master's in clinical psych from Columbia's Teachers College, where I was really interested in issues around education for youth and developmental disorders. And then I did my PhD in developmental psychology, where I was really focusing on cognition and learning. However, the larger research program that I'm interested in is the contexts that improve children's cognitive, social, and physical health. I'm particularly interested in youth who are from educationally and economically disadvantaged situations, and my goal is to inform interventions to help youth. And so this postdoc is kind of a perfect opportunity where I'm bringing together a nonprofit organization, Ramapo for Children, and integrating research in an applied setting. So my dissertation really looked at contexts that can improve executive functioning skills. And executive functioning skills are a cluster of cognitive skills that include attention, inhibition, rule use. They aid in emotional regulation, they aid in decision-making, problem-solving, and they've been a real focus on developmental psychology research because they've been linked to school success, both directly through academic achievement and indirectly through classroom behavior. Children who traditionally have lower executive functioning are children with developmental delays, learning challenges, behavior difficulties, and children living in poverty-impacted neighborhoods. There's a wide range of contexts that can improve executive functioning because, unlike other cognitive skills, they develop throughout childhood and into adolescence. And so research has focused on these types of interventions. And broadly, what a review has found is that as long as the interventions are challenging and enjoyable for children, we might see some change in executive functioning. However, the research is really very limited at this point. One of the contexts that has been found to improve executive functioning is exercise, both in the short term, in a 20 to 30 minute bout of exercise, and also over long-term interventions. Another area that has been found to improve executive functioning skills is video game play. It's been linked to specific cognitive skills for children and linked to executive functioning improvements for adults. And finally, there's a small body of work that has been looking at these physically active video games, or exergames. And they have found that both children and adults can improve executive functioning in both the short term and the long term when they play these games. One of the issues in the research is it's unclear what the mechanisms are for change. So is it that children are involved in something that's cognitively engaging, that involves mind and body, or is it because of the metabolic impact, so the increase of oxygen to the brain, the increase of adrenaline? And so my dissertation really aimed to kind of try to untangle some of those questions. And so my main research question was if children in an exergame condition would improve more on executive functioning measures after a short intervention compared to a non-play control, an exercise group, and a sedentary video game group. So this was a very controlled, laboratory-based study. My second research question was based out of research on exercise that's found that with higher amounts of exercise, you increase your executive functioning skills more. And also my third question was to make sure to look at gender, because there's a lot of differences in how girls versus boys engage with video games. Boys have more experience playing video games, and also in research have been found to exert more energy when they're playing these physically active video games. A quick overview of my methods. Kids came to the lab with their parents for a 90-minute session. We gave them a pre-test on their executive functioning measures. They were assigned to a condition where they participated in an activity for 20 minutes, and then they were post-tested at the end of that activity. The first condition was a non-playing control. We put non-playing controls in to test for a test-retest effect from pre to post-test. Then the main condition of interest is this extra game condition. Kids played Dance Dance Revolution. It was the game that was picked both because it could be played both actively and inactively, and also the way it's played is very tied to executive functioning, where there's rule shifting. You have to follow cues on the screen and move in a direction that is similar to those on-screen cues. Now, my video didn't come up quite correctly, but I'm going to show you a couple seconds of this girl. She was one of the things, kids played a series of songs. They couldn't fail, so we set it so that they had to keep playing. The game gives feedback as they go. So if they make a mistake or they don't step quick enough, they get a negative feedback. If they do it correctly, they get a positive feedback. And they play continuously for 20 minutes. So now let's see if I can switch back. Oops, not Excel. Even though I love Excel. So the second condition is a sedentary game. They played the exact same game in the exact same order, though they sat and they played using a handheld controller. You can see here, this is what the screen looks like. They have to line the arrows up on that screen. And then the final condition was an exercise condition. We picked a series of exercise based on how children engaged with the active video game. And so in the exercise movements were very similar to what they looked like for the active video game group. Differences are they were demonstrated the activity by a researcher, there was no music purposefully, and kids were able to move continuously without any negative feedback. So they were able to keep exercising, they got a good job along the way, but they never were told that they were doing poorly or that they needed to stop and change directions. So my participants were 147, 7 to about 13-year-olds that were recruited from Southern California, about equal numbers throughout each condition. About half were female, had mixed ethnicities, and an average family income of about $30,000. We gave them several different executive functioning tasks. The one I'm focusing on today is the one that we had the most variability in. We saw the most change. It's actually the most difficult. And this is called a flanker task. In a flanker task, these are really traditional executive functioning tasks. Participants are shown 5 items. In this case, they're fish. When the fish are blue, children are asked to focus on this center item, and they're to press a computer key based on the direction that fish is facing. When the fish are pink, they're to focus on these outside, these flanking items, ignore the center item, and press in the direction of those outside fish. Children are given a practice block with the blue fish, then they're given a practice block with the pink fish, and then there's the main experimental trial is a switch back and forth between these blue and these pink fish. There are also congruent items where the fish all face the same way, and then as these are demonstrating incongruent items, children have the hardest time with these pink fish. These outside fish is much easier to focus on a middle fish than it is on the outside, and they have the hardest time with the incongruent items. So you really see a lot of difficulty around these pink incongruent items, and so that's really what I'm going to focus today on my data analysis, because these are the hardest. We look at both accuracy and response time on these kind of cognitive tests. Check for individual differences to see if any of these individual differences were driving the change from executive functioning versus the effect of their condition. There was a range in session duration that didn't make a difference. All kids, including the control kids, loved participating, they loved coming into the lab. Sometimes I wonder if I'm inflating results because kids like to come and hang out with us, but that's okay in this case actually. Thought prior video game experience might make a difference. It didn't. Kids had about an hour a day over the course of the week. Boys did have more video game experience than girls. Kids did pretty well in the games. They had about a 70% accuracy when they played. They did better on the sedentary handheld game than the active game. Boys did better than girls. However, gender didn't make a difference overall with executive functioning change. Looked at energy expenditure. Exercise had a much higher rate in that high exercise zone. They were exercising for about 20 minutes versus about 7 for the extra game, though it didn't make a difference. So to test my main hypotheses, what I use is a 4x2 repeated measures ANOVA, and I use planned contrast. What this means is a repeated measures ANOVA partitions your variability into three different ways. First, it looks at within-person change, so change from pre to post, how much variation is just within a person. Then it looks at your between-person changes, so how much of the variability of change can be accounted for being in these different conditions. And then the main thing you want to look at is your interaction effect, so how much of the between and within, so the varying patterns of change are based on being in that condition, okay? And so checked age when needed, checked energy expenditure when needed, and gender when needed. Like I said, I'm only going to look at this outside incongruent, this hardest trial. What I found was that the video game groups had the largest effective change from pre to post test. And then the exergame group had the largest effective change. One thing that's really nice about repeated measures ANOVA versus using like a different score is it takes into account where people start. And with executive functioning, it's particularly important to do that because people with the children with the lowest executive functioning have the most to gain. And so basically, my first hypothesis that participants in the exergame condition would show the greatest rate of change on the most difficult trials is what I found. And overall, these two video game groups did better. And so some thoughts about why. First of all, the game is uniquely suited to boost executive functioning skills. That's why we picked it. It's very in line with what this flanker task is trying to do. It's rule shift, focus on different directions, and inhibit your response. And so both video game groups had to do this. Now, the exergame group had to inhibit their response even more. So you imagine stepping in one direction and having to change versus pressing in one direction and having to change. It takes a lot more cognitive resources to do that. So children in the exergame group had a lot more practice there. Where in the exercise group, while they expended a lot of energy, they never had to stop, they never had to slow down, they never had to switch tasks. And so that's one of the real reasons I think is driving this change. We did see I saw the pattern for accuracy, not response time. With children with cognition, they have to slow down in order to be more accurate. And just reminders, none of these other things matter. My studies were not without limitations, as all studies. First, children did pretty well overall, and really the questions of interest are how do you do interventions for children with lower executive functioning? Also, this was an acute study. It's a stepping stone. What's really of interest is these long-term changes, longitudinal changes, and we need to have a better idea of how long a training session is needed. More research is really needed to look at some of this video game gender issue. And finally, just some thoughts on impact. The study does add evidence to this growing body of work about this idea that the combination of physical activity and cognitive engagement makes a difference for executive functioning. Video game research is really controversial. There's a lot of negative thoughts around video game play. So this adds to the research that's saying there are maybe some cognitive benefits to it. And finally, and most importantly, it supports this theory that there are these everyday contexts that children participate in that they enjoy, that can improve executive functioning, and it's really important to keep that in mind when we're designing interventions for it. My thank yous are to all the people at UCR and some funding that I had to do this study. And there's questions and my contact info.
So today I will be presenting a part of my dissertation, and the dissertation was on child savings accounts in Uganda. Before I proceed, I want to give a very brief general background where the research question comes from. And prior to joining my doctoral program, I worked with Oxfam, Great Britain. I worked in the former Soviet Union and in East Africa, in Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda. And something that is very puzzling about the region of sub-Saharan Africa is that the poverty, even though it's decreasing around the world, it remains the same in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're not only talking about the poverty as measured in terms of the $1.25 living below the international poverty line of $1.25, even though every second person in sub-Saharan Africa now, every second person, they live under under $1.25, right? But we're not talking only about that dimension of poverty. We're also talking about the non-economic dimensions of poverty, such as access to education, access to health, and etc. And I want to emphasize that I'm more interested in adolescent poverty because adolescence is the period in life where the patterns of further behavior they form, and then also adolescents are demographic dividend, and the adolescents living in poverty and suffering from having no access to education, no access to health, it actually may turn them from economic dividend into the burden, both economic and social. And so my dissertation will be on child savings accounts, on addressing the adolescent poverty. Now, the poverty is studied by many different disciplines, and I forgot to add that my background is in political science and international relations, so I was privileged to have an interdisciplinary look into that. And there are different programs trying to address the poverty, and some programs are tackling specific dimensions, right? Some programs are specifically focusing on economic dimension, on education dimension, and some programs have what they call integrated approach. So they're trying to tackle several dimensions all at the same time. And one example of such an integrated attempt to address the poverty is asset-based approach to poverty reduction. Now, I will go very briefly through that, and even though it's a very interesting discussion to have. But the asset-based approach to poverty reduction, they say, they claim first of all that assets have an effect different from income. That's very important. So it's different from income, and it's this. So another thing is that assets affect not only economic well-being, but assets they also can affect the psychosocial well-being. For example, having a possession of accumulation of assets or possession of assets, they can improve a person's self-esteem, future orientation, etc. So at depression level, and at the end, in a longer term, these effects can help the person move out of the poverty. Now, asset effects have been operationalized within the institutional theory of saving by Professor Michael Schraden, who I had the privilege to have in my dissertation committee, and so it was tested extensively in the United States, and interestingly, it was found that poor people can save. Even though the basic argument that poor people, they don't have enough money to save, poor people do save, and they can save if they're provided with specific institutional structures, and I will talk about what are those institutional structures. Now, from that broader perspective of asset-based approach, so to test the asset-based approach, Professor Sheridan and his team, they created the institutional, there was an institutional theory of saving, and it was tested within the individual development accounts. Now, individual development accounts, they're bank accounts, they are subsidized, and there are certain institutional constructs that are attached to the individual development accounts. In my dissertation, I'm looking into child savings accounts. This is a very particular type of individual development account. First of all, it's targeting children and adolescents. Usually, these accounts are opened in the child's name, and so child savings accounts is a type of youth saving product. Now, I want to draw your attention that not every youth saving product has all these constructions. For example, not all there's a variety of youth saving products across the developing world, and I'm focusing most on developing world. That's my area of interest. So I'm not touching the examples in UK, Canada, and US, etc. But not every child savings account existing in the developing world, they have, for example, matching rates. Right? So I want to draw your attention. This is important for the research that I'm doing. So I'm focusing on child savings accounts that provide incentives, financial incentives, such as matching. You deposit the money, it's matched on a certain rate. And then also people who open up this account, they're provided with financial education, helping them to save. And there are also withdrawal restrictions. So you can't just save money for no matter what. Usually the withdrawal restriction is you save money to further support the child's education. There's also a certain facilitation through the peer support, through the mentorship, and finally access to financial institutions For example, sometimes, as it was happening in Uganda or in Kenya, a bank would come to the school and the bank account was happening at the school. You kind of bring in the institution to the child. Now, my question was to examine the effect of participation in this matched savings accounts on adolescent saving attitude and financial asset accumulation. Now, okay, and let me briefly, so I was working with Professor Flynn, who is the principal investigator for this study, and he, along with his colleagues, they've been testing the effect of participation in these accounts on psychosocial outcomes. There is close to non-existent research showing the effect of participation in child savings accounts, specifically on saving attitude and accumulation of financial assets. Pretty much, I'm trying to take advantage of a randomized control trial to answer the question, as a result of participation in the child savings accounts, do they really save? Do they really save? Or they would have saved anyway, or they don't save? And whether, as a result of participation in that child savings account, does it really change their saving attitude, or it doesn't? So I had a question: what accounts for an individual saving behavior? And I was just literally drowning in the literature, because there's literature all over. And I'm talking about it in my theoretical framework. There's a literature in classical economics theories and behavioral economics theories talking about the individual characteristics such as age, gender, individual preferences, time preferences, motives, future orientation, etc. These are possible factors that can potentially affect individual saving behavior. There's also family financial socialization theory that underlines the importance of a family level either discussions or relationship effect of family on individual savings. And there's also this institutional theory of saving that I just said. So my question, which I had several questions in dissertation, so I will cover just one, which is whether the institution, the intervention, right, has an independent effect above and beyond effect of individual and family characteristics. So that looked pretty simple. It wasn't that simple to find an answer to this question. Again, I'm using the data set from Subi Maka. It was supported by NIH grant and Professor Fred Suwamala, who was at Columbia University, now he's at the University of Chicago. He's the principal investigator. I was lucky to have a longitudinal data, 3 years. I was lucky to have a data not only on adolescents, but also on their caregivers. So we are talking about the diets, 346 diets at the baseline. There was about a 10% attrition rate, but I still went ahead and imputed the data. Using the multiple imputation. And it is a cluster randomized controlled trial. The randomization is at the school level. 5 schools were assigned randomly to the control group, 5 schools were assigned to the treatment group. And I will tell what treatment group was receiving. And boy, I had a wonderful data hierarchy. So my data not only varies across the time, the data is nested within the families, it's nested within the schools also. So, what is it that I'm testing? I'm testing the effect on these measures, specifically saving attitude and financial asset accumulation. To measure the saving attitude, and it's all self-reported data, and I want to draw your attention to the fact that I'm using, I'm using the self-reported data because we didn't have the administrative data for control group. But we did have self-reported data for both control and treatment group. All right. Okay, 5 minutes only. Now, pretty much what I did is I had a block of individual level variables. I had a block of family level variables. This is my family level variables. And I had the final thing, which is the intervention. So initially, I ran the generalized estimating equation model with individual variables. Then I added the family level variables into the model, and then at the end I added the intervention to see, and then I was comparing those models using this model criterion for model selection. The lower this model criterion, the better the model. Okay, and here's my finding. First, briefly, no effect on saving attitudes whatsoever. neither on reported willingness to save nor on reported confidence, right? However, there is a significant intervention effect on self-reported saving, which was, do you have any money saved anywhere? Yes, no. There is an effect. There's also an effect on the amount, the reported amount saved. Now, 2 minutes. What I want to draw your attention that we had administrative data on savings from the banks for treatment group. So you can't imagine how happy I was when I found the correlation. Seriously, that was probably the happiest moment in my dissertation. I found the correlation between the self-reported data and the administrative data. So that was very good news. Another very interesting news is that the correlation was not, so I was looking into correlation between the amount saved, right? Now you have an amount saved in a saving account, but you also have an amount saved reported by child, by adolescent and by parent. No correlation for adolescents, correlation for parent. Which kind of, you can sit there and speculate about many different things. So it is possible that it's not the child that is saving, it's the parent that is saving. Or it is possible that the child doesn't really know as much about the amount they have. Thanks. All right. That's my future research, which I probably don't have. Very briefly. What is very important before we go on and recommend the child savings account for the replication or for policy implementation, etc. There are many questions that still need to be answered, and this is great because we have a lot of work to do, right? So we don't know who makes the decision to save. For example, within the family, we don't exactly know who decides to save, who brings technically the money and deposits it, and how the decision about the saving is negotiated within the family. And we also don't know if there was a child saving account for orphan versus child saving account for non-orphan, would there be any differences, right? Because orphans are usually taken by extended families, we don't know that. But that's a very interesting thing to study. Another thing is how much saving is enough to get out of poverty. Right? How much? If we implement it at the policy level, how much saving? How much money we need to accumulate in the child savings accounts to say, okay, they graduated from poverty and our job is done. As Professor McKay, she wants to eliminate the poverty forever. So, and then the other question is the changes in attitudes or no changes in attitudes and changes in saving behavior. Would they be possible using another program, or having the comparison of between the programs or cost-benefit analysis between the programs would be something fundamentally important to do before we proceed to the replication. I think I forgot the acknowledgement slide, but it's very important because there was a whole bunch of, I had like 3 pages of acknowledgement in my dissertation because there was a whole bunch of people in Uganda. They were very important. Usually their names are in no papers, but this is the team. They collected the data and they know every single child. So I was fundamentally grateful to them. And of course, I was working with Professor Sulumala, who is also originally from Uganda. And I think Professor McKay also was involved in designing the SUBI project. So again, thank you. Sorry for that.